Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the February 25th, 2019 meeting of the Rutherford County Regional Planning Commission. If you would stand with us, please. Commissioner Mike Vaught will lead us in our prayer and our pledge. Mike.
If you'll bow your heads. Most gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us to come together and conduct the county business. We ask that you give us wisdom and discernment as we go through this process. We ask that you be with the first responders and those that are serving our country here and abroad. Be with us as we go through this meeting. Help us to do your will and do a wise job. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
If you'll face the flag, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Call the roll, please, Gail.
Charlotte P. Here. Chip Pinion.
Here.
Craig Lynch.
Here.
David Jones.
Here.
Jim Aberwater.
Here.
Lee Bogle.
Here.
Mike Cush.
Present.
Mike Vaught.
Here.
Pettis Reed.
Here.
Rhonda Allen. Here. Jeff Phillips.
Present.
We have quorum.
Thank you, Gail. This time we need to approve the minutes for our for our December 10th, 2018 meeting and our January 28th meeting. Call on Vice Chair Mike Cush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Both those sets of meeting minutes appear to be in order. I have no corrections or amendments, so I'll make a motion to approve.
I have a motion and a second to approve both of those meeting minutes. All those in favor of that motion to approve, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion to approve carries. Thank you. We've had 3 items withdrawn from today's agenda. It looks like item 6A1, preliminary plan. Item number is 19-1001, Smotherman Estates. 6A2, item 19-1004 for 12 Corners. And 6B1, this is a final plat, item number 19-2001 for Todd Thomas. Those items have been withdrawn and will not be heard today. Getting right into our business, item 6B2 submitted for a final plat approval. The item number is 18-2101 Webb Farms, Ralston, Maynard property, 3 lots on 7 acres, zoned RM, located along Holly Grove Road. Swader, Ralston, and Maynard are the applicants. Doug?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and good morning, Planning Commission members. Hope everybody's doing well on this Monday morning. This first plat before you is the Webb Farm, Ralston, Maynard property, as you stated. This property contains 2 grandfathered residential structures, a 3rd residential structure, which is one you will see on Lot 2, which is on your screen, was brought into the property but was done so without a permit. We spent the last several months trying to figure out a way to try to do the lots in such a way where every one could be on its own lot. And finally, they've come up with a configuration that we think is going to work. We did have several comments on this particular plat. Most of those comments have been addressed. There are a couple things I do want to bring to your attention. The first is the CUD just provided a determination that a fire hydrant cannot be supported in this location, so a waiver will be required for that provision because of that. The other had to do with the scale that this is drawn at. I can't tell if you can see where the scale bar is, but this is it's done at a 1:80 scale, and that's an unusual scale for a plat, especially when you're dealing with septic soils. It needs to be at least 1:100. So we've relayed that to the surveying team on this. Now that's something that they can work around. I don't necessarily think that needs to be deferred because of that. Back in regards to the fire hydrant requirement, this is a 3-lot subdivision, so any new structures that would be created, like if some of those residents were to be removed and new ones placed on the property, those would have to be sprinkled, but the existing residents wouldn't have to be retrofitted for that. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. So with that, again, beyond those comments, this plat appears to be in good order, and we'd recommend approval subject to those changes.
Doug, how do you access lot 2? Use the same driveway, or am I missing something here?
It's a flag lot. As Mike's is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm with you.
Yeah, they have their own, every one of them would have their own road frontage.
The crosshatch in red then is the driveway.
Well, it's just kind of outlining where that is, but yes.
All right, that's it.
Mhm.
A lot better.
Right.
How do you get into lot 3 then?
So lot 1 has two
Oh, there it is.
residents?
It's a cutoff.
Lot 1, yes. I apologize. Yes, there are 2. I think those are all pre-existing. So that's not going to change, because right now this is just one lot as it is. So that in and of itself won't change.
Is there a reason you wouldn't have made it a 4th lot?
Beyond the fact that you would have to have waivers to the private easement provisions and the size of the lot off the private easement and everything. Again, it was like this to begin with, so.
I just knew you were trying to clean it up. I didn't know if that was
Right.
another cleanup piece or if there was a reason
Right,
you wouldn't
I
have
think
done
that part's okay. The real cleanup was really with that, Mike, can you pull that back up?
the 1.2.
Yeah, hold on, Mike's gonna pull that back up here.
This mouse will cooperate.
Yeah. On lot 2, right, that was really the biggest cleanup, is trying to get that on its own lot. But all the other existing, originally they had tried to put those 2 on their own lot, but they were running into issues because there'd be a setback issue, that'd be considered a front yard for that one closest to lot 3, and they were running into setback issues there, so this seemed to be a better solution than what they were originally proposing.
Assume it's family type situation,
I believe.
meets all requirements under commercial approval.
I'll second. Just, I have one more question. On the lot 3, you've got a mobile home and a house, and that is the mobile home into a setback. Oh, to be. I'm sorry. I see the note.
Yeah,
To
that,
be
yeah,
removed.
that, yeah,
Okay.
that one on lot 3 is to be removed, yes.
I got you. Okay. I'm good. Thanks.
We have a motion and a second to approve item number 18-2101 for Webb Farms. Any other questions? All those in favor of that motion to approve, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? Motion to approve carries. Thank you. Item 6B3, 18-2052, 12 Corners, Section 2, Phase 1, 41 lots on 18.29 acres, zoned RL, located along 12 Corners Road. RHB is the applicant. Doug.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. The preliminary plan for this section was approved by the Planning Commission back in June of 2017. This final plat was originally approved back in May of last year, but that approval has expired. This plat is in pretty much good order. The comments we had have been addressed. I will talk just briefly about the mail kiosk location. Of course, since this was approved originally, this was approved back in May before we received the information from the post office about the kiosks. At that point, that wouldn't have been an issue. However, now, being it's had to be reapproved, they're going to have to put a kiosk in. As you see, and Mike circling it there, they're going to put it on lot 121. Originally, we had looked at possibility of putting it on lot 149, which is at the end of Corona Court. But after discussions with the applicant for this particular subdivision, they thought it'd be a better solution, and I don't have a big issue with it. They do know that they're going to have a site plan approval for that, so that's in the works right now. But as far as this plat is concerned, they have identified a location for that. It's just going to be on the common area lot, so I'm okay with that, but they will have to have the site plan before we'll release lots and all that, and have it constructed so that anybody who's building homes in there, once they're CO, they'll be able to get their mail. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Is this a step system?
Yes.
Do we see the step field on this?
The step field's not on this particular plat, no.
Just with this being
Further
phase
section.
1, I was just trying to figure out where this
Right, well, it's phase 1 of section 2,
section.
so,
Okay,
right.
Gotcha. Okay.
Where'd he go, Mark?
Yeah, you broke it, good job.
Eric. I blame the drums.
Is that a major blue line stream?
It shows up on the TDEC stream assessment map. I think it does have a significant drainage area because it's got a 60-foot stream buffer. Anything with a square mile and larger has a 60-foot stream buffer from top of bank, so it does have a significant flow through there.
Talk about that consent to drain. There's a note on there about consent to drain letters.
That was from the original subdivision that I guess when it was originally established, Mr. Rhodes, when he sold the property to the developer, granted them drainage consent to drains letters.
And it's sufficient for this development?
Well, we have
Okay.
2 stormwater detention ponds on this one.
You're not going to need it.
So, Mike, silt fence and property fence will go behind lots 130, 131, 149. So there will be no clearing, grubbing, anything behind those lots that would disturb vegetation to the stream,
No.
interfere with the buffer, or anything like that.
No, sir.
No equipment's going to be beyond the boundary of the back of those lots.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve 18-2052, 12 Corners, Section 2, Phase 1. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of that motion to approve, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion to approve carries. Thank you.
Doug, I have a question. On whatever it is, this is off of 266, State Highway. We had the same thing at Walnut Grove and 231, which was a state highway also. And we did a traffic study. At what point do we do a traffic study here? Because we've had some neighbors wondering about a turn lane up there or a caution light or a stoplight or whatever, because you've got Lofton Road, Canesville Pike, 266 and 96 all there together. Do we need a traffic study to determine when that trigger point is, like we have it on Walnut Grove and 231?
I would say probably for any new development coming online. I mean, this subdivision, most of this was approved prior.
And I realize that,
Yeah,
but
so-
there will be more coming.
Right now, if there's more coming.
And there was a
at
guy
that
killed
point-
there last summer
Right.
at that intersection.
Okay, now, if we start seeing more development out that way, then I think, of course, at the time, we didn't really have anything in our regulations that would allow us to do the traffic study to require that. There is that in place now. We have that mechanism. So any new development that would come online outside of this, then I think we'd have the ability to say, okay, you need to submit a traffic study for our review to find out if any improvements would need to be made.
Well,
to the
that's some neighbors
intersection.
ask, and that kind of stuff, so we might keep that in mind.
Yes, sir.
As we go on down the road.
Item number 6B4, 19-2007, Gary Battle subdivision, one lot on 3.54 acres on RM located along Shores Road. Gary Battle is the applicant. Doug?
Yes, sir. Thank you. The applicant's proposing to divide about 3.5 acres from an existing 11-acre tract. Right-of-way dedication is required for the frontage, which is why this is coming before you today. Really, the issues that we had on here have been resolved. There is one issue that I will point out that shouldn't affect any approval, but anytime we have a subdivision plat site plan brought in for our review, we do require state plane coordinates on 2 corners. You can kind of see, Mike will kind of highlight where they are. One's there and one's in the other corner. That allows us to input this into the GIS, and it's the same system that we use, so everything talks to each other and everything jives, if you will. These points, and the surveyor of record had talked to me about it and said, the county's GIS was having some issues over the last week or so. They weren't sure if they're going to be able to have those coordinates tied down properly. So he realizes that that needs to be done. So, and we'll make sure that that's taken care of before this is recorded. But that's the only thing really that's outstanding on this. Beyond that, this plat's in good order. So I have every confidence that they'll take care of that prior to the plat being recorded.
Are they going to share that driveway entering in, do you know? Go back to the aerial.
I think it's carving off just
Outside of that, right?
Outside of that.
There's nothing that says they couldn't. I believe it's family related is why they're doing this. If they do want to do that, they should probably have some sort of like a cross-access easement, which I don't see on the plat. But there's nothing that, if they wanted to have their own driveway access, it would just be a matter of coordinating that through the highway department.
I'm just thinking, I'm just also thinking exit points, and that's going to be
Right.
so close right there.
Mm-hmm.
Because until I saw the aerial, I didn't understand the reason for the property line to fall the way it does, but they're
Mhm.
following the driveway and the tree line.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'll just, we'll make sure with the applicants, and the applicant is present actually, so if you want to ask them that. But, I mean, again, there's nothing that said they couldn't, they just need some sort of cross-access easement to do it.
It's not in the FEMA flood zone, but it is in the shores localized. So they will need to have minimum pad, minimum floor established. What's that?
It was on.
It is,
Yeah.
yes. Just to protect the house from any future flooding or recent flooding.
Anyone have any questions for the applicants since they are here?
I would like to know about the driveway, what their plan for the driveway is.
Would you please come forward? State your name, please.
I'm actually Ryan Battle, Gary Battle's son. We've talked to the neighbor about possibly using a little bit of their driveway and kind of the right side of the property and kind of veering off from that. If not, we were just going to push another driveway right down the side.
They've got L1, which is this property line along shores, is 55.12 feet. And the driveway, from what I could scale, from the aerial is like 70-something feet. So they'll still have 50 feet of frontage here to put in another driveway if they wanted.
I was just curious. We always look at access points for safety, and the
Right.
fewer you have, the better. And so I was just curious, especially if you're doing it for family, why you wouldn't want to do a shared driveway. Is it just because of where you're going to place the house?
Just in the long run, if property gets sold,
Okay.
nobody's sharing a driveway.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Ultimately, if it's something you decide you want to do, share the driveway, I'll just have your surveyor go ahead and add a cross-access onto it. If
Okay.
not, you don't have to. Just something to be aware of. Be a
Right.
bit easier to take care of it now than in the future.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Battle.
Just like to comment, I don't think it's going to affect any decision
No.
today, but if you have roots in that neighborhood, you're probably familiar with the flooding issues that many of your neighbors very close, very, very close to this piece of property have had. Some of those experienced some problems just this past weekend, not near as bad as 2010, but it does happen there on a regular basis, and I hope that you're aware that your house needs to be, and your driveway needs to be raised up to compensate for that.
Yeah, it's definitely something I've kept an eye on, and kind of where the house is going to sit really hasn't hit any kind of flood. Maybe a little bit in the front area part of it, but yeah, that's definitely something I've kept an eye on.
Doug, the aerial we're looking at, when was it taken? 2010?
May 2010, May 4th, 2010. 2 days after the rain stopped. And
Oh.
this elevation is connected to the river, the sinkholes, so the water was still coming up as the water in the river was still coming up.
We're looking at pretty well peak water here.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Battle. Any other questions? Any comments?
What's the size of each lot going to be? Is the entire lot 3.5 acres, or
Yes,
is
the
each
the
one?
lot is 3.5 acres. The remaining acres would be about a little over 7.5. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Mhm.
I'll make a motion to approve, subject to staff comments.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve 19-2007 Gary Battle subdivision. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of that motion to approve, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? Motion to approve carries. Thank you. Item 6C, these items are submitted for site plan approval. 6C1, 17-3002, Andrew Wildcheck, Track 2. This is a reapproval, new construction of 20,000 square feet of warehousing space on 6 acres, zoned light industrial, located along Franklin Road. Andrew J. Wildcheck is the applicant. Doug?
Yes, sir. Thank you. The applicant's proposing to construct 20,000 square feet for warehouse and storage purposes. There's not adequate soil on this property for any kind of a septic system, so there's not going to be any water service to these buildings. It's really going to be just strictly for storage. The site plan was originally approved by the Planning Commission back in June of 2017. Site plan approvals are only valid for 18 months, so if a building permit is not obtained by that time, that approval lapses, so the applicant's just asking for reapproval of the site plan. The plan itself is in pretty good shape. Really, the one thing that we're still trying to work on has to do with the landscape plan, and that has to do with the buffer on the north and the east side. Really just dealing with the width of the buffer, being that this is industrial next to residential. It's a thicker buffer that's required. You can use an average of the buffer. It doesn't have to be exact, but that's something we're still kind of working through. So that's something we can handle at a staff level. I'm not too concerned about that, but I still have some issues with that. So beyond that, the site plan itself is in good order, and we'd recommend approval, just subject to us working out the details for the landscape plan.
Doug, is this mini storage or is it? It's not.
It's not mini storage, no, sir.
Just storage.
Just storage in general. Yes. He's going to break it down. You can kind of see how he's got it laid out there, and about 6 or 7 different. I mean, that's not exact, probably, but
those are
roughly
proposed
speaking.
walls, or
right
something
inside.
in that neighborhood.
Yes.
You don't have to have a restroom for
If you're
employees
not
that would be on
well,
site? I mean-
not for. I might let Tanya Bell, our hose director, deal with that more specifically. But if it's just going to be strictly for storage and not necessarily an office space, then not necessarily. Now, if there was going to be something like that, and again, Tanya can speak more to this, if there's just no way to put a septic system on the property, there are other options as far as like a pump and haul type situation or something like that, but there has to be documentation that there just is no way to put a septic system on the property.
Is there water in the other buildings on that property?
I believe in the other building, not in this one, but in the other buildings, I believe there is, yes.
You said that you're still working on the landscape plan. Is there a photometric plan? Because there's a plat note that says if they add lights, I would think you're going to have to add lights.
If they're going to add lighting of any kind, they don't have to, but if they were, then they would have to submit that. But
hasn't
they
been.
I haven't seen anything, but again, that's not something we usually would see that. But we don't always see that on the front end. That's usually something we'd see. We can look at that prior to issuing building permits. I'm not as concerned with that.
Yeah, if Tanya could come talk to us about the restroom facilities, I'd just like to know. 'Cause, I mean, you're going to have employees there at some point, and it just seems counterintuitive they wouldn't have somewhere to go.
Morning. What was your question about the restrooms?
Why restrooms would not be required on this particular type of use?
They're not required in a strictly storage building because it would be used strictly for storage. They're not going to be permitted to put any offices or anything in there. Offices would constitute a bathroom being required.
So we're just anticipated a very limited amount of time on site, and that's the logic behind not requiring a restroom, or?
Right, strictly for storage. There wouldn't be any employees there. They would be strictly there to either drop something off or pick it up.
Okay. Which would be different than warehouse use, I guess, because warehouse use you would expect that there would be an employee there on site.
Some sort of an office
Correct.
or something
Okay,
like
so
that.
that's kind of
correct.
how we're distinguishing. Okay.
Do you anticipate longer-term storage or short-term storage, and they're in and out a lot, or do we know? What do we think?
The applicant's president, if you'd like to.
My understanding is going to use it for rental units, I think.
Looks like a good use for the property.
Yes, it's going to be
Andrew,
long-term storage.
Andrew, you'll need to come up and speak in the mic. State your name, please.
I'm Andrew Wilczek, the developer. It will be long-term storage, and it's primarily overflow for existing customers. I have 6 customers right now who are needing additional storage to the businesses they have operating in the adjacent buildings.
What type of customers do you have?
The customers that will go in the new building, one is called Mattress Direct. They have 3 retail stores here in Murfreesboro, and they store the mattresses in my buildings. A second one is a candle company, Butterfly Candles. They manufacture in one building and they need overflow storage. The third one is Mac Door. They're a wholesale door manufacturer who need additional storage for their supplies. The fourth one is Jump Jump Bounce. They supply, these things people put in their yards, and they're needing additional storage. And then the fifth one is an HMI container company, and they supply emergency boxes for their customers in our geographical area, and they ask for additional storage also.
And Doug, this would be different than going through BZA for a traditional storage unit, or has this gone
Well,
through
this
BZA?
is light industrial, so if this were going to be like a mini storage type, it would
Okay.
be allowed by right.
I got you.
So
Okay.
it's not required for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really, it looks like a good use to me of a piece of property that, well, doesn't have a soil site on it.
I move for the approval, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
We have a motion to approve and a second for 17-3002 for Andrew Wildcheck, Track 2. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of that motion to approve, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? Motion to approve carries. Thank you. 6C2, 19-3009, Hackney Wedding Venue, new construction of 6,031 square feet of event space on 181 acres, zone residential low density, located along Smith Hall Road. Terry and Melanie Hackney are the applicants. Doug?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This last site plan on the agenda today, as you stated, is the Hackney Wedding Venue on Smith Hall Road. The applicants received a special exception from the Board of Zoning Appeals back in August of last year to operate a wedding venue / retreat. This site plan is part of that approval. There were several comments that were identified during staff's review. Those comments have been addressed to our satisfaction. The plan appears to be in good order. We can answer specific questions if you'd like, but the existing building is there. It's going to be converted into the facility for the retreats. You can see the parking areas there. These are going to be more of a grass overflow type situation. They are going to have a gravel area, but they're also going to have a paved area for handicap parking. That's within our regulations. If you recall, when we did the retreat regulations a couple of years back, we did allow for alternate types of parking. They didn't necessarily have to do paved parking, but for ADA purposes, they are required to do that. But with that, again, this site plan appears to be in good order. So with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions. Here, try this. Try it on the white. Sometimes it's the contrast there. Can you go grab a AA battery?
Doug, Smith Hall Road is a county road then?
Yes.
Is there a buffer plan and all that for them? I mean, is it
Well, they're using a lot of
existing
plantings. I mean, this is a large piece of property, and the area that they're looking at is fairly tucked into the property. I don't foresee that being a real big issue.
Okay. Same way with lighting and noise or signage or
Correct.
any
There's
of that?
a small amount of lighting. They'll have to show us, photometrics and everything. They're aware of that, but this is, again, tucked in there. There's not a lot out here, so.
What about signage? Where's that going to?
Well, any signage they would have, if they're going to have any signage, it would just have to be on the property. They would have to submit diagrams and everything to us for approvals for that. That wouldn't come through the Planning Commission. I don't think, were you planning on doing it? Yeah, they're not planning on any sign. The applicants are present, but they're not planning on any signage.
I'll make a motion to.
Can you put your cursor approximately where the building will be?
I think there's one out there, but I'm not seeing it on this aerial.
I think it's relatively new.
I think it's relatively new.
Behind the pond, sort of?
Existing building.
It's just not on the, I don't think it's on. There's the road.
That's the structure's right about in that area.
Right
'Cause
in here.
that's the driveway.
This is the building here, the gravel road. Mirrors this. This is the pond out front, that you can see here. So the structures in this area.
There's not an existing residence then on the property,
I think there's an older house kind of toward the south of the property, or
but
older
not
house
one that's
barn
used,
structure.
currently used or has been used recently. And Doug, they got Board of Zoning Appeals
Yes, sir.
approval?
That's correct.
On that old barn up on here, top of the hill, where the proposed barn is located now, the wedding venue's here. I think they have to access Richland Richardson for water through here. I think they own this parcel too, I believe.
Staff recommendation.
We'd recommend approval.
Thank you, Dave.
Chair, I'll make a motion to approve, subject to staff comments.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve 19-3009 for Hackney Wedding Venue. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of that motion to approve, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? Motion to approve carries. Thank you. Staff reports.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. What can I drive here? Yeah, technology is great when it works. Let's see. Okay, before we get into, you can see on the agenda, we've got an item under staff reports regarding the mining, drilling, and quarrying report that I had presented to you at the last meeting. But before we get into that, there's one other item I did want to bring up for discussion. And this is in regards to, actually, the reason these two preliminary plats on today's agenda were pulled from the agenda. I kind of want to discuss that just briefly and kind of get your thoughts on it. Actually, that's the wrong one. Hold on, I'm sorry. There we go. When we created the zoning ordinance that was adopted effective January 1st of 2013, you'll recall that we based a lot of this on the comprehensive plan. There were areas that were identified as suburban belt area, which we recommended as 3 units per acre as far as density, residential density is concerned. And then in RL, residential low density areas, we recommended 1 unit per acre in that. As part of the creation of the ordinance, we realized that in the RL areas, those areas that would require 1 unit per acre, we realized that there were going to be properties in those areas that would have adequate soil, infrastructure, and whatnot that could handle a step system, have adequate water for fire protection, those kind of things. And we recommended that those areas in the RL, if they could meet those criteria, if they had either a sewer system or a step system and also had adequate water for fire protection through fire hydrants, they could build at the same density as the RM. So those two preliminary plans that are on the agenda today, Smotherman Estates and 12 Corners, both fell into that situation. They both had adequate soil for step system, and they both had adequate water that they could have fire hydrants for fire protection. So they were allowed to go down to the 15,000 square foot minimum lot size based on this section of the zoning ordinance, which is on your screen right now, the variable lot size and adequate infrastructure in the RL zone. So they qualified under this particular situation. Now, the question that I wanted to pose to you is this. The property is still going to be zoned RL. And these are the, as you can see on the screen, these are the requirements for RL as far as lot size. You can see, now I'm having problems with the mouse now, but you can see under excuse me, so let me just see if I can't get this to do right here. There we go. You can see this particular section here, this is lot width. Now you can see between the RM and the RL, lot width for residential units is 75 feet for the RM, but lot width in the RL is 100 feet. Now lot width in subdivisions is measured at the front setback line, not at the road. They still require a 50-foot of road frontage, but at the front setback line, it's required to be at least 75 feet in the RM and RL being 100 feet.
That kind of covers your cul-de-sac type lot.
Right. Right. And actually in cul-de-sacs, you can actually have a little bit less road frontage, 40 feet even, but on cul-de-sacs, yeah, they typically branch out pretty hard. The issue that we're running into, and this was never the intent of this, but you can see for variable lots, the lot size says can be reduced to 15,000 square feet, but it doesn't say anything about the lot width. When we created this, I don't think it was staff's intention to make somebody in an RL zone still have a 100-foot minimum lot width, even if they were still zoned RL. We thought that they would just go down to the RM lot width requirements as would be required for anything else. But the reason that those two subdivisions were pulled from today's agenda is the fact that they were showing predominantly lots that were under the 100-foot lot width at the setback line. So after discussing that with both of the design engineers, I said, look, that wasn't the intent. We can bring this to the Planning Commission to kind of get your thoughts on it. This would be an easy amendment for us to make. And like I said, that would fit in with the intent of what we had in mind when we first came up with this. It just, we didn't word it that way when you look at this. We just really concentrated on lot size. And this isn't something that happens very often, so I don't think the impact's going to be very large, really. But unfortunately for the subdivisions that are being considered that were pulled off the agenda today, it would result in lot reduction because they would have to kind of refigure the lots so that each one would have at least a 100-foot lot width because they're actually zoned RL, even though they meet this requirement that they can go down to 15,000 square feet. So
How do they meet that requirement? Are they in an area that...
One's in the Midland area, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Hoy Woods old place.
So
right.
How are they zoned now?
They're zoned RL.
With a minimum lot size of 1 acre?
That's what the requirement normally is, but that, talking about the Smotherman Estates one, we'll just use that as the example. They have adequate water for fire protection. They've received information from CUD that they can support fire hydrants, and they're going to use a step system. So based on those two criteria, they can go down to the 15,000 square feet. Again, we never intended for them to have to meet the 100-foot lot width. It's just we didn't word it. The way this is worded, I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, you can go down to that, because if somebody were to challenge that, they'd say, where are you getting that authority? And I would have nothing to point to.
Is what they're doing, though, pretty much taking it to a residential medium?
Yes.
Why don't we just have it rezoned?
I mean, that's an option, but then you'd start having RM pockets in the RL area. This was to kind of
Well, but in essence, you're still having an RM development in a RL zone, so
Right.
what have you gained by not doing that?
I don't know if you gained anything one way or the other. I think this would be cleaner just changing the ordinance rather than rezoning it.
Here's
but-
kind of what I was thinking is just, and I'm, you know me, I'm having an argument in my head right now as I'm talking to you about it. If you want to keep it RL, the idea of having that wider width, you're going to have an increased density, but having that wider width at least a little bit pretends like you're trying to stay RL. You know what I mean? Like you're trying to create a little space between those houses. That's all I'm thinking. So if you want to walk and quack like RM, why wouldn't you be RM or why wouldn't you be a PUD?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no reason I don't think to go to a PUD on this one. The lot size.
I'm just
right,
thinking out loud of their
right.
options. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and again, the whole reason we came up with this provision here that's on the screen is the fact that we knew that there'd be some properties in the RL that could support RM density. So that's why we came up with this. But again, I guess we just didn't think about it at the time that when we had these two different lot widths. I don't believe it was our intent to say, oh yeah, you have to build a 100-foot lot width.
What kind of lot reduction do you think you'd see?
It would depend on.
If you use that
yeah.
Smotherman as an example, just ballpark.
Yeah, I would have to talk with the design engineer about that. Honestly, I'm not sure. I mean, they'll have to lose some, but exactly how many, I don't know.
Yeah. I should, if you estimate 25 a lot, I just didn't know that would, if you could get a calculation.
Yeah, and some of them weren't. I mean, some of them were only like 5-10 feet off.
Not
Yeah,
that
they weren't.
straightforward.
They weren't.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not straightforward.
they weren't that small. They weren't at the minimum.
Yeah.
What is the intention of having the two zones with that type of difference?
Well, when we did the comprehensive plan, the analysis that was done kind of had a line between which had the better chance of being developed with 3 units an acre versus those areas which didn't. Again, we looked at a lot of different factors in there. But with anything, and we knew that at the time, we knew that there'd be some areas, I mean, it goes kind of both ways. There's some areas in RL that we knew would support RM density, but there's going to be some areas in RM that won't support that, just for various reasons. So,
Could you pull up this other one just so we could see how close the next zoning, I mean, so just since we're using it as an example, I'm just curious.
Mike, can you pull up the county-wide map and we see how much is affected
right down there on the right.
in this zone?
Put the mouse to work.
Yeah, all right, quit blaming it on the map.
seems to work all right on that.
You're not running any of those drones in the county.
Yeah. Taking the juice out of the mouse.
Yeah, for real.
That's the property here, highlighted in yellow.
So I'm imagining that zoning to the south is probably RM.
This is all RL.
But I mean, is the Delrose and all that, I mean, that subdivision, I'm guessing it would be RM, right?
There's your zoning.
That's anything in yellow is RL.
RM,
So
okay.
now, of course, a lot of those subdivisions were already in existence when
Predated.
we rezoned everything.
Can you scroll, Mike, and show us how close you are to the RM there?
RM's right here. Yeah, you don't even have to zoom out. You can just.
You're not asking for an exemption, you're asking to change the.
I'm actually going to change the ordinance, right, to allow an RL development that can meet the RM requirements as far as density, that they would also be able to use the lot width.
You're trying to avoid spot
the same
zoning.
bulk requirements that would be allowed in RM is really what I'm saying.
You're trying to avoid spot zoning.
Correct, and that's part of it, because, and that's a good point, because we would have to justify why this was different than the comprehensive plan. And, I think it's cleaner to change the ordinance than it is to have small little RM pockets all over the RL district, especially when that was the intent in the first place.
Change the ordinance, you can put it on our 6 p.m. meeting for public hearing.
Correct. Now, I will say this, we've got 6 public hearings next month. If that's the decision that the board wants to go, I don't foresee this being a very controversial type issue, and I think it'd be relatively easy to get through. The next item we'll talk about, I don't know so much. We decide what to do with that, but at this point, 6 that's a lot of public hearings. We haven't had that many in quite a while.
To speed this one along, let's hash it out right now. Our ideas, so we don't hash it out over there. I think it's great. I'm from the, not Midland, but I'm from the furthest part of this county. And if my farm is able to do this kind of subdivision, I don't want to be penalized because I'm in the furthest reaches of the county. Because there is no furthest reaches of the county anymore, because, hey, Mike can look in your swimming pool anytime he wants to. So this county is just one county. We're no distance out there.
Yeah.
Like that, Mike. The other Mike. I think it's good. I didn't like the 1 acre anyway, because I know Bedford County's got that. You just 1 acre, you're just eating up your county in 1 acre lots.
But you are protecting low density. I mean, No, I'm just saying in 1 acre lots, not this example, but just what you were saying about they're eating it up in 1 acres at a time. But for people who want to live in low density, I mean,
They can buy 1 acre.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. You're protecting that, so I don't know that that's necessarily a bad
Me
thing.
as a
but-
landowner, if they
Yeah.
want 1 acre or 10
Yeah.
acres, I'll sell them whatever they want.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't want the county telling me.
Right.
I'm like Jim now, don't fly over my house.
Yeah.
So if we hash this one out,
I guess.
who don't like it, who does like it?
Mhm.
So if we do this and we allow this, what's the point of the RL? I'm gonna ask the question that looks like to me is on the table.
Well, most of the RL district, you're not going to have this. When you start getting further and further out, like I said, I mean, soil is always an issue, and even beyond the soils, the bigger issue you run into is the water availability. When you start getting out into the more rural areas of the county, you simply just don't have the capacity or the pressure, whatever in the lines that can support fire hydrants. Now, CUD has made a lot of improvements in that regard. In various areas, and they're looking at areas that are growing faster than others and making improvements based on that. They have their own schedule of how they handle things. So, and that's fine. But
We got a PUD 2 miles even further to
Mhm.
the south.
right, and if you remember, right, that one had to have sprinklers in it, just because of this same issue. Even with the improvements that they're making out in that area, or have made, I should say, out in that area, they're still going to have to employ sprinkler systems. So, if it requires sprinkler systems, there's a mechanism for that. But even if they have a step system, I mean, that's automatically, if they don't have water for hydrants, that's automatically kicking them back up into the 1 acre per lot. Now, the plan development was a little bit different because they actually got specific zoning for that. So, but just generally speaking.
If this is changed, what's the difference between RM and RL left?
Well, the zoning, again, that's not changing. All this is saying is if there's a particular piece of land in RL that can meet the criteria, which is existing, as far as step system and adequate water for fire hydrants, they're allowed to build at the 3 units per acre. They just can have a slightly smaller lot width. Okay. That's the only change, really, that we're proposed. Nothing else would be changing in that regard. Say again?
The width.
The width is the only thing that's changing, yes. The density is not changing any.
And it's only for these unicorns out there, those rare pieces of property that can do all the things this one does.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Pulling up the adjacent property subdivision plats, you can see the lot sizes directly to the southeast. You've got some that are 2,300, 23,000, 39, 45.
Now, those are all septic,
Yeah, these are a
traditional
little
conventional
bit
septic,
larger.
yeah. So those are going to be larger lots.
They're not
So,
on a
yeah.
step system.
So, quite frankly, I mean, and if the ordinance actually makes a provision for that. Again, if you've got adequate water for fire protection, but you don't have a step system, you can go down to a half acre.
For 22,000.
22, yeah, roughly half acre lot, yeah. But so 22,000 is the number we used. But again, that's a larger lot. I don't think the lot width is as big of an issue on that because a larger lot, you're going to have a bit like that plat Mike was just showing you. You're going to have a large lot for the soil. So I mean, that's not unusual in that situation.
I think since you're now I finally have the understanding that the lot square footage is not changing, just the width of the lot. I see it as an opportunity for fewer linear footage of roads to maintain, fewer miles for the school buses, and other issues. I think I could support it. I think I understand it now. Early on in the conversation, I didn't get it, but.
And I apologize. That's probably the way I explained it. So sorry.
We were going down to a potential 100-foot minimum.
A motion might be in order for us to approve it and forward it on for a public hearing.
That'd be fine. If I mean, I think that's appropriate. If you're okay with the concept of what we're proposing, we'll come up with some language and then we'll present it at the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make that motion to change the lot size. On the RL.
Lot width.
Lot width on the RL zoning.
Have a second to that?
Second.
Okay. we forward this and pass it on, we still have an opportunity to vote on it again after the public hearing.
Well, right, yes, sir. At this point, all you're saying is you approve the concept that you want to move it forward. So, yeah, there'll still be opportunity for discussion at the next planning commission meeting. Yes, sir. And then beyond that, if that gets past the planning commission, then it would also go in front of the board of commissioners for even further comment.
Everybody understand what we're voting on? Not the final vote, but the concept vote. Okay. All those in favor of that motion to approve that concept vote, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. Okay. One other item that I do want to discuss with you today, and this again is in regards to the report that was brought before you at the Planning Commission last meeting. Every now and again, of course, this is something that we always look at. We're always kind of looking at our zoning ordinance to determine if things need to be tweaked or anything like that. This is in regards to the regulations that we do have for quarrying, drilling, and whatnot in Rutherford County. We also have had people ask us about the setbacks and, have discussions about, potential future projects, although we haven't received any new applications for any quarries. But what we end up, the biggest point of discussion that we have really has to do with the setbacks, the existing setbacks we have for quarries, which are located within our zoning ordinance. Now, you'll recall that we made some changes to those requirements when we did our zoning ordinance update several years back. And currently, and you can see on the screen right now, and this is the report that was given to you. Our current requirements, and this again is excavation area only. This is like the quarry wall. This isn't necessarily all the other activities that go on. They have to be at least 1 mile to the property line of an existing community education activity, which is typically a school. 1,500 feet to the property line of any existing community assembly activity, which would be more like a church or something like that. Healthcare activities, residentially zoned property, including residential portions of planned development. 1,000 feet from any property zoned office, institutional, commercial, or the special character areas, and also 300 feet from any property zoned in the industrial districts, public roads, or any rights-of-way. The only requirement that is not measured from the quarry wall is this last one, where it says nothing shall be stored with any time within 200 feet from any property line, with the exception of parking, fencing, offices, weight scales, those kind of things. As far as any kind of stockpiling of material or anything like that, it has to be at least 200 feet from any property line. This report focuses on the setbacks.
Doug, these figures that are here, where the cursor is now, that's to the quarry wall, or that's to the quarry property?
The quarry wall. These four bullet points right here
are all to the quarry wall.
Excavation area or quarry wall.
All right.
Yeah, the only one that's not is this one right here, and this has to do with storage, and that has to be 200 feet from any property line, period. Not the quarry wall, but just period,
And
any storage or anything like that.
Include
Stockpiling of material, things like
gravel,
that. Right.
Yes, sir. Rock, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. The only things that's exempted from that are parking, like if they had an office for parking, fencing, things like that, weight scales. You would probably expect to see that closer in anyway. But everything else is subject to these particular requirements. So as part of, when we first came up with this report, really this was a report that was given to you years back, and we updated the report and added a little bit more to it. But you'll see what we ended up looking at were regulations from other communities. A lot of these were ones that we had originally looked at in the first report. These seem kind of random, and the reason they seem a little more random is the information we received from the sources we looked at originally. These were most of the towns. There's a couple that we've taken out because we couldn't find their updated regulations. We didn't want to include them in there. But the information that we originally received, we tried to be consistent with that. And then we added in, I think, town of Smyrna, I think we added in as well, just for comparison purposes. As you can see, I'm going to just skip to the chart here. And this is Appendix A. And you can see what we ended up doing was we listed Rutherford counties first, and then we put all the others in here: Smyrna, Anderson County, Knox County, Williamson, and then some of these other areas. The setbacks, quite frankly, are all over the map. There's not really a set distance or anything by looking at any of this. that you could sit here and say, well, most people use X amount of feet for their setback, because it just varies so much. It's all over the place. And to help kind of get a better idea for the commissioners as far as just taking a piece of property in the county. Now, this isn't anything, just so you all know, this is not an active application or anything. We just took a 600-acre plus parcel and said, okay, if you were to use these particular setbacks, our current setback at 1,500 feet, which is this, and you can kind of see the red area. This is the scale here. This is the 1,500 foot, 1,000, 750 going back, 500 foot. You can kind of look at this chart and see, based on that, these are the usable area that you could have for quarrying, actual quarrying. So out of 630 acres, if you use a 1,500 square linear foot setback, you're looking at about 60 acres. If you go to 1,000, you're looking at 199, on and on. And this is what's unusable. So as one goes up, the other one goes down, obviously. So this just gives you an idea of how those setbacks play out when you look at this. Ultimately, I'm not going to sit here and say we have any kind of a specific recommendation as to what number we were to go with if we were to make changes to this. But I will say that this mouse is a piece of junk. That's what I'm going to say. Sorry.
Y'all need to feed your mice.
Yeah, I think we need to put in a little requisition here for something. Yeah, touch screens. Yeah. That's something. Again, this report is for informational purposes. After reviewing our regulations, what staff would recommend, as far as the approval of permitted zones for quarrying activities, I don't recommend any changes to that at all. Right now, quarries are allowed in only 2 districts, agricultural, residential, and heavy industrial. And they're only permitted by special exception. They're not permitted by right. I don't recommend changing that at all. So any person, any company that wanted to come in here and do a quarry, A, would have to find a piece of property. Then they'd have to rezone the property. That requires 2 public hearings. After that, they would have to get a special exception through the Board of Zoning Appeals, which requires a 3rd public hearing. I don't recommend changing any of that. I think that's appropriate, just considering the impact of this type of
Unless it was
use.
already AR or HR.
Correct. If it was already zoned that, and then they just have to go to special exception. That is correct. But assuming it wasn't, because most of the land that's out there is not zoned either one of those. There's only a handful of agricultural properties, and they probably wouldn't be large enough to handle that kind of a use anyway. The only one that's zoned agricultural that would probably be large enough would be the Bill Rice Ranch. But, of course, that's being used for something else, so I don't anticipate that ever being an issue. Well, Beatty Farm is as well, but even I don't know if that's even large enough. But all that to say, I wouldn't recommend changing how or where they're approved as far as that goes.
Does Eagleville or Murfreesboro or Laverne have any language on quarries?
I haven't checked Eagleville or Laverne. Now, I know Murfreesboro doesn't really have much of anything. It's really very basic as far as I believe it's mentioned in the ordinance, but there's not really any kind of there's nothing like we've got. Mm-hmm. It's very, that's why we didn't include them in the chart, because there really was nothing to include. So, but again, in the city limits, you're just not going to find large enough tracks for something like that. It's just going to be difficult for that. Our existing, I'm sorry?
We faxed this to Cannon County.
Well, it's been a while, but they've actually talked to us about zoning in general, so they have. I also don't think our buffering or screening requirements need to be changed. This report does kind of go into that a little bit, but it focuses primarily on the setbacks.
Doug, if we did have an instance where you had, let's say you required 500 feet, and then you're next door to another quarry or something industrial, is there any provision in the language that would allow somebody to apply for an extra 100 feet of mining there? That's what it means.
Not built into the regulations. They could ask for a variance to that, but quite frankly, I don't know if staff would be very supportive of that. Now, another option, which has been batted around a little bit, has been the ability of maybe someone to ask for a planned development for something like that. I'm not a real big proponent of that approach. Of course, with a planned development, you can kind of create your own regulations as far as that goes. I mean, we see that a lot with residential development. You know, the setbacks are different and the lot sizes are different. In theory, you could do that. But again, that's, to me, it's almost you're trying to get around the regulations at that point to try to get yourself a more corrigible area.
Yeah, I just
So I'm not
wondered if it, if you had that one instance where it made sense to allow them to go closer to the fence.
Now, we do allow for reduced setbacks as far, and if you remember back at that, I'm afraid to try to scroll up there because I don't know if I'll ever get there, but we can try it. Yeah, it's working so far. Let's see. Anything that's zoned industrial has to have 300 feet from industrial property. Again, that quarry wall area, which is a lot less than the 1,500 square feet. So we do make provision for that, where the setback they're not quite as stringent. But beyond, kind of addressing what you were saying, if they just wanted to try to get more, they would have to ask for a variance to that provision, but they'd have to explain why they feel they need a
That
variance
is a
to that.
possibility, as long as it's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
Really
possibility. I
makes
don't know how much
sense
of a
and
probability it is, but it is a possibility.
Yeah, everyone's on board, and there's 1,000 acres behind them that's nothingness, cedar trees and nothingness.
Mhm.
If you're selling, doing shot rock versus crushed rock, same thing. You're not crushing, you're just selling.
Well, I mean, if it's the blasting, it doesn't matter to me what they're taking out of it.
Still have to get the
yeah.
state permits
Right.
for mining and processing.
Have those regulations changed since we wrote ours? The states, basically,
I think so.
where
I'm not
everything,
sure.
I just wondered.
Yeah.
I mean, our ordinance references, in our definitions, it automatically references the states anyway, as far as mining and quarrying and all that goes. So if there are changes made, we don't have to make any changes to ours. It's automatically reflected in that. But as far as these kind of setbacks and things we're talking about, I don't believe the state really gets into all that. That's really more at the locality level as to how they want to handle that. Some, like, on that chart that's on that report, I mean, it's all over the map. Some have more stringent setbacks than even ours. Some aren't as restrictive as ours. So if we were going to make changes, we would recommend making the change to the setback. That'd be the only thing we'd recommend making any changes on. But as far as how much that would be, that's kind of what we'd leave up to you. We probably would lean more on the side of 750 to 500. But that's
Versus the 1,500?
versus the 1,500.
Okay.
Why aren't we bringing this up? Why are we even talking about this?
Well, like I said at the beginning, first of all, we do tend to look at our regulations just to see if things need tweaking. Second of all, we have had people ask, about this and have brought up concerns about the setbacks. So, which is kind of what got us looking at this to begin with. So that's kind of two-pronged when we look at this.
One of y'all scroll back where we see the top part again.
The top part of,
Where bullet points
Yeah.
were in that area.
Are you talking about making changes like 1,500 feet from,
Residential.
yeah, I guess this is the second bullet point.
Basically, the second bullet point is what we might consider changing.
That's what I would recommend, if anything.
Rest of it stay the same.
Mhm. I mean, if you wanted to take this one down to, now this probably isn't going to be the 1,000-foot probably isn't going to be as critical, just because there's just not that many areas that are zoned this in the county. There are some, and quite frankly, one of them that we have had some discussions on is very close to a special character district. So, I mean, this is something to think about as well.
How close? I mean, real close, where the 1,000 feet would affect it, or?
Probably.
All right, let me put my recollection hat on. We did discuss this, and I think this discussion even went over multiple meetings several years ago, in terms of how we came up with the distances. And Doug is right. I think we polled other counties or other cities, maybe even other states, as to get some idea of what others had done. But what it boiled down to was a debate about what blasting could do to neighboring water wells, dust, just what it could do to the foundation of a home that was nearby. And I remember in particular this community assembly and healthcare activity about, you know, you've got a hospital. What would a continuous 3 o'clock blasting do to patients and things like that? So there was a lot of debate and a lot of good discussion brought up about this, and this is why we ultimately came up with these setback numbers. And remember that this is if a new quarry were to come in to that area. This did not restrict on the reciprocal of that. In other words, if you wanted to build a subdivision and encroach on that, you could. Buyer beware, you were getting close to a quarry, but this was only if you were going to construct a new quarry. So I guess I want you all to remember some of the reasons why we talked about this, and it was noise, dust, perhaps interference with water wells, and just the whole blasting. When you blast in limestone, you know, you have a shock wave that can travel hundreds, thousands of feet. So it's just an unknown. So I guess if you're going to, Doug asked the question, you know, what can staff do? What would you like to find out? I guess one thing I would like to ask for Mike, maybe between now and our next discussion on this, maybe you talk to some of your geotechnical engineer buddies, a Vibratech engineer, and find out in a typical quarry blast, if there is such a thing as a typical blast, in our part of the world where we're sitting on solid limestone, how far can a negative impact travel to a house footing, slab, you know, brick veneer,
Including a well?
including a water well? I mean, what is the reach of damage that could happen? Would be, I think, one of the top things that I would like to understand.
I want to add to that conversation because I remember we talked about this
At a long length.
and it took us a long time to all get to a point where we agreed on even being able to vote on something. It's so fresh in my mind, I can't believe that it's been that long since we voted on it and talked about it. One of the parts that that Mike's talking about was somebody made the suggestion, you know, well, do we want to have a greater distance from a school? Well, the problem with that is, as a county, we're trying to protect our asset, but we're not willing to protect the assets of the residents and allow them the same distance back. So that was part of what fed into this as well. We were like, it's one of those things, put yourself in their shoes. What would you want if you were the one? And so that's kind of one of the things that guided us there. The other thing that I really struggle with, and there's no good answer to this, is that we have the engineering and we have the numbers and we have what you're going to come back with this on the geotech stuff. And then we have the anecdotal of homeowners who come in and say, my house is covered in dust, my foundation's cracking, you know, and that quarry is doing everything in compliance. They're doing everything they're supposed to be doing and they're following every regulation. But anecdotally, we're still seeing impacts. And so, you know, we have very few rights as a county. We only have those rights that the state gives us. And I actually looked for any language on TCA related to quarries, and I had trouble really finding hardly anything. And so if this is one tiny area where we can protect our residents, there's a huge part of me that feels like we need to do that. And I feel like by reducing this, you're inviting this use in. And I don't know a single Rutherford County resident that you would poll who would say, hey, do you want us recruiting quarries. You know, I know it's a necessary evil, and I know you need rock to build things, and you know, and I never want to be anti-business, and we've got, you know, some great local business owners that I just think the world of. But at the same time, it took us so long to put these protections in place for residents. I would just really wrestle with rolling them back.
I live in the 2nd District. I'll swap you one quarry for one landfill any day, though.
This discussion come up at my last time that I was on the Planning Commission, and I remember the extended time we spent on this and those discussions that we have there. I know the different things we threw about, and since that time, there are new things that have developed too. I have to go back to just out there in my district where we had an individual that was crushing rock with a mobile unit that did that. And then we had situations where families had special needs children that noise affected them. We didn't have that, I don't think, when we did this discussion back when planning. Now that isn't a factor in there today that we didn't have back then that we have discovered. I think what we did at that time when we were planning this, I think we did a good job with it at that time. And as the old additive goes, you know, you let sleeping dogs lie. I think we did what we should have done, and I think it's there properly at this time. And I just don't think. I think it's appropriate what we have here. You look at the other counties. I'm sitting here right now looking at them. There is, like you said, a mix match of what you've got there. I think they too said, you know, what is the bad? You know, what is 500 more feet? What is 1,000 more feet? What is that? I think where we are right there, I think is where we should be. You know, I can't see where I would change it.
Something else that we look at as well, and I'm not saying that the county's in this situation, but when we look at the 1 mile from schools and everything, as more schools are being built, which again, I completely agree with what you were saying, Rhonda, as far as protecting our investments. I completely get that. At some point, and I'm not saying we're at that point, but at some point do you get to a situation where there's just no way to have a quarry in the county? Now, again, I'm not saying we're to that point, but something that we look at from a planning standpoint, from a legal standpoint, is you cannot zone a use out. You cannot exclude something specifically. And you can sit there and look at our regulations and say, oh, well, you do allow them. You allow them in these 2 zones by special exception. But if the setbacks and the requirements are such that they simply cannot be supported, that use cannot be supported somewhere, that's a potential legal issue. So that's something else that we look at. So just throw that out there really more for your consideration than anything else. I mean, we'll be more than happy to come back with more information on the things that you've asked about. That's fine.
The only thing I'd ask about that is, have you zoned it out when you say that it can be used? Because there's nothing that would prevent someone from acquiring multiple parcels and assembling an area large enough to do it. Just because you don't have a singular area doesn't mean that you've zoned it out. Am I wrong?
I mean, I think in theory, I don't think
I'm just saying, you know, because I know that. I know, you know, I want us to follow the law, and I know that we talked about that extensively too. We didn't want to outzone. I also know our very wise counsel told us people can sue at any time for any reason, so we have to be prepared for that regardless of what our regulations are. So we just have to cast these votes in good conscience. So.
Well, in that same vein, to protect a county asset like a school, and say a quarry wanted to encroach on whatever distance we agree on, could you not ask that quarry owner to put up a $250,000 bond to put in escrow to protect for a period of 10 years any damage, both underground infrastructure or structural building, that you could pinpoint to damage that was done from quarry blasting?
That's something I'd probably want to research a little bit. I mean, there's nothing in the regulations that would allow us to do it now, but could we do something like that? I'd want to look into that a little bit.
Well, and based on what I've heard from citizens, it's very hard to have a direct line of responsibility. How do you prove that that's what caused it? That's all. That's what I'm hearing again and again. You know, whenever we've had these, we haven't had anybody up here in a long time, but I remember when we did, it was a parade, and you know, and they were heartbreaking stories. You know, so
I trying to see both sides of this argument, and I certainly recall and understand those reasons for coming up with these setbacks. At the time, I remember thinking there's going to be no way to, or going to be very, very few opportunities to put a quarry in this county, which is going to make it more and more difficult to build schools, build roads, raise up your driveway because it floods, build a home, build a business. As time goes by, it's going to become near impossible to get rock anywhere near here. Much of it right now is being brought in from Bedford County and Cannon County. That we still have some operating quarries here, but they've become more expensive and more difficult and going to run out of life here before long. So we've got these dump trucks running up and down the roads from Bedford County, tearing up the roads and creating traffic hazards and whatnot. So I need to kind of be a realist here looking at it. And I was surprised when I looked at all of the other regulations that you submitted as part of this, that our regulations really are pretty strict. So I'm going to be really interested in seeing what the staff comes up with on these impacts on blasting and that sort of thing, to see if we really did take it too far, or if we had some sort of scientific evidence that we were using to establish those boundaries. Because, you know, I just think, you know, in the next 10, 15 years, we're gonna continue to need rock, and it's becoming more and more scarce here. So I want to take a good. I feel like we should take a good look at it, but base it on harder facts for our neighborhood, and not just what other parts of the country are doing. We do have the limestone, and that is going to make it more blast sensitive, but I don't want to just pull a number out of the air. I want to see those facts.
Go ahead. When you get those results back from the seismographs or whatever you do,
A geotechnical engineer,
yeah,
geologist.
I've got a farm, 200. The quarry line is 200 feet from the road in Bedford County. Rogers Quarry he's talking about. I got a farm across the road over there, and then I live about a mile as the crow flies from it. And when they blast, I feel it. But when I feel it worse at 300 feet, 400 feet, 500 feet, or a mile, how much? I mean, I know, you know, if you go against what these two have said, you know, I like the 750. I like what you're coming up with, but I know a lot of people in these subdivisions are closer, you do have more dust. I'm not right down there by it. I'll agree, but I just wonder, these imaginary footage, you know, just how far do you have to go to not smell it? You know?
Yeah, and we'll, like I said, we'll be happy to come up with that. But I would reiterate, even if we change the setback, I don't think we're just going to start seeing just a long line of people wanting to come in to do quarries. Yeah, and again, it's going to have to be, they're going to still have to go through, assuming that they're getting property that's not zoned for it, which again, there's just not that many parcels out there that are. They're still going to have to go through a 3 public hearing process. You know, 2 public hearings for rezoning, and then 1 public hearing before the Board of Zoning Appeal for a special exception. So
this is a random question, random thought that I had. If a piece of property is zoned AR, but it's used commercially, is it taxed? If let's say if you have a quarry, let's say you do that, is it taxed at the commercial rate because there's a business, or is it taxed at the residential rate?
I believe, and I'm gonna qualify this by saying that's a decision ultimately would be made by the property assessor's office. But my understanding of how that works is they base their appraisal on the use of the property, not necessarily the zoning.
But the percentage of the assessment.
Correct. They would use that assessment for commercial, which
yeah.
is what, 40% versus the 20, 25, whatever it is. But my understanding is even if the property were zoned agricultural residential, they would still look at what's going on with the property, which is not obviously an agricultural use. They would say, okay, this is more of a commercial/industrial use. That would be taxed at the higher rate, as I understand how the process works.
I was just thinking, I want equity for farmers is what I'm thinking.
Right.
I just want.
Right, yeah, and if, I mean, obviously, you can have a farm in residentially zoned land.
Yeah.
So even if the property is zoned residential and they're using it as a working farm, agricultural purposes, they're going to still qualify for whatever green belt, whatever else that they would qualify for, regardless of the fact that their property is zoned residential.
Doug, I noticed a couple of those places. One was in Oregon, maybe one was on the old list from years ago. One was in Ohio.
Right.
I would be interested to see if you could pull up, maybe not that specific city or entity. I'm just curious, particularly the Oregon one. They would generally be, you would think they would be more restrictive than us, but I don't know. Depends on which county, I'm sure, in Oregon. But I'd be interested to see what someone way away from here, you know, how restrictive they are.
Okay.
So if you can pull up a couple, it doesn't have to be those two. And the one in Ohio might be less restrictive, I don't know. See if they've changed.
Well, when we did this report, when we gave this report, when we gave this report to you, we actually we updated these, so these should be current. Because we just didn't take what was already there and just rehash it. We actually looked at these again and make sure that they hadn't changed. Well, like this is the one in Ohio, Batavia
it's
Township.
500 feet.
500 feet, any property line, road, street, resident, district, et cetera, et cetera.
The one in Oregon on there.
Yeah, Clackamas County. No distance was specified, but it says excavation shall be away from the property line a distance adequate to maintain a fence on the property line. Such additional distance as is necessary to allow a normal safe angle of repose during operations. I'm not quite sure what that means. Assure lateral support, support of adjacent property and provide the slopes identified in a reclamation plan for a depth of final excavation. So Clackamas County, at least that particular one. And there's another Ohio one here.
Is that a rural or semi-suburban or urban county?
I have no idea. I can look into that, but I really don't know.
This was last updated
When we gave you this report just a few months ago.
No, he's saying, what year did we do the?
Originally would have been about 2012-ish, right around in there. Yeah.
I don't even know how to put this, but if there are some legal issues, maybe we're better off just to face those legal issues when they come about. I don't want to ask the staff to do a lot of work if we as a commission are going to say, no, we're not going to make a change anyway. And I hear some mixed comments about that. So if there are legal challenges, maybe we ought to just face them. But if we ask the staff to do a lot of work and we come back and we're not going to make any changes anyway because of what we went through 6 or 8 years ago, 6 years ago I guess it was, if we're not going to make any changes because we've already been through it once and we darn sure don't want to go through it again, then I don't know if we ought to even ask staff to do any work. Maybe what we ought to say is that we're okay with where it is and let the chips fall where they may at some point in time. We all heard Josh give us some really good feedback the last couple of years on property rights. And when it comes to quarries, I think they're property owners and they have property rights too. And our 1,500-foot restriction may be arbitrary. So that might be some legal concerns. But are we willing to say, well, just because it may be legal, that we're willing to make a change in our ordinance? I'm not sure that we are. So we can have staff do all the work. If you say it's not going to take a lot of time and effort to do that, and we can hear that and then make a decision, I'm okay with that. But I don't want them to go out doing a lot of work and the majority of us saying we're not going to make any changes anyway because we've already been through that and I don't want to go through it again. So we just need to kind of make up our minds what we want the staff to do. Are you guys?
We should take a vote on whether we want staff to work on it.
Yeah, show of hands.
Well, I will say this.
Just to
at
kind of
least,
get back to the original question is, why have we brought this up? Why are we even discussing it? Why do we want to even consider making any changes?
Well, like I said, the primary reason, A, is, you know, this is always something we're always kind of looking at our regulations to see if things need to be tweaked. Considering the fact that we have had some people asking about this and we wanted to look into it, we thought it'd be appropriate to at least kind of look at what we have. And
you're talking about people like
possibly wanting to make an application or you know, something to that effect. You know, existing quarries that maybe want to expand. I mean, we have had those conversations. So, and the setbacks are an issue. So we have told them we would look into this. We have had someone who is possibly looking at establishing a new quarry, but had some issues with the setback. So we said we'd look into it. I mean, that when it boils right down to it, that's really kind of the catalyst of all this, if you will. But at the same time, like I said, the fact that, I mean, just because somebody asks, you know, if we look at it and think everything's fine, I mean, sometimes those discussions don't even get all the way to the planning commission. Someone says, well, you should do this and this and this in your ordinance, and we look at it and say, no, there's nothing wrong with the way we've got it. You know, we think we should stick to the way it is. But if we hear what they're saying, we look at our ordinance and say, well, you know, maybe this is something we should look at. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, what we're looking at here. I'm not saying that we should make changes, we shouldn't make changes, that we absolutely have to do something. All I think I'm saying is it was worthy of us looking into it. And if we were to make some changes, what staff would recommend would probably be to the residential setback, to maybe lower that some. That was our recommendation. If anything was going to be done, that was what we would make the change to.
The questions that we've had that relates to some of the information that has been requested, is that an easy thing to do?
Well, I had a couple names pop in my head about geotechnical engineers, geologists. I'd contact them and say, hey, what's your interpretation? Or are you a blast expert? Who can I contact for some information on blasting? I mean, it's a wide variable, though. I mean, it depends on the size of the excavation that they're performing. You know, there's so many variables. How far a blast wave will travel, how deep they're blasting. I mean, there are several variables. But I had some names pop in my head that I would think, oh, I need to contact him.
We couldn't turn this into a 7:30 training session some morning, could we?
Could.
Yeah, possibly could. Yeah.
If you could get enough people together and different points of view, maybe two, I'd be interested in hearing it.
I just feel like that looking at these other regulations, ours is just so much more restrictive than a lot of these other places, even Williamson County. And I think, you know, did we think this thing through correctly?
Oh my God, we thought it
Maybe
through.
we made a mistake.
I don't know.
I could answer that. Yes, we did.
Yes, sir.
At this time, I'd like to make the motion that we do not make any changes to our current regulations.
Second.
We have a motion and the second, and we're still open for discussion.
You started at the 1,500 foot from the residential. Did the 1 mile not play into that at all? Does that eliminate a lot of properties?
Well, around a school, it would.
With us building or potentially building more schools, is that becoming any sort of a influencing factor? Or in other words, I'm looking at if we reduce the residential and we don't reduce the 1 mile for the public facilities.
I mean, it's a
that's really gonna
possibility.
look bad,
It is a
I think.
possibility. Now, a lot of the schools that we have been building, of course, have been in clusters, so that might reduce the impact some. But if you're talking about new clusters, then is that going to have an impact? Yeah, it could over time. Maybe not so much right now, but over time.
Because I'm looking at the 1 mile and the 1,500 foot. If we even entertain going to 750, you're talking about a tenth, or just over a tenth of what the mile distance is. That's just really, it seems like a huge leap to me on that distance.
Now, the mile and the 1,500, I believe, were existing under the older regulations. They kind of moved over to the new one, if I remember right.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
That's just a big, a big jump.
Well, because the 1,500 is a third of a mile.
roughly, yes.
So, you know, to take it down to even smaller, that just, you know, and, you know, Jim, to your point, you know, we could have just as easily had a list of communities who were more restrictive than this. These are just the ones that are
Well,
on this chart.
you know, this is what we were given when
Right,
we first did.
right.
Now, I mean, could we find other ones that are probably more restrictive? I'm sure we could.
I mean, because, you know, you
Yeah.
look at Smyrna, they want 3 miles from another, you know, from one quarter to the next. You know, that's a lot more restrictive.
Mhm.
So, just thinking out loud.
And like I said, and I was going to say this earlier, I mean, I know there's a motion on the floor, and I won't belabor the point, but what you've asked us to do, I don't think will be overly time-consuming. I think would be okay to bring that back, or as the suggestion was made, you know, a possibility of some sort of training thing for that. I mean, I don't think that's something that would be overly time-consuming once we figure out how we would make that work. But, I mean, it's up to the commission how you want us to move forward with that.
Is that a recommendation from staff, that you do a little additional work?
I'd be comfortable with that, and I mean, Mike's nodding his head here. I think we'd be okay with that.
Greg? You sure can.
I'm certainly not an expert, but I do believe that you'll find that some regulations have changed in the last few years, and the frequency of a blast is going to come into play here on how far it's going to be felt, detected, because the frequencies are going to be less, but the duration can be longer. So you'll have a smaller blast with a longer duration to create the same usable tonnage. So I just want to throw that out.
Mike, is
What did you just say?
Blasting technology has
State
changed.
regulation.
Yeah.
They rumble.
Yeah,
it's going to be a smaller explosive.
right, but the
it's-
duration will last
It's gonna be
longer.
longer, so it's going to
Right,
creep
there'll be
out.
more smaller
Yeah.
explosions in one event.
So is that more detrimental to the guy a half a mile away, or
Less, I believe,
less
because of
detrimental?
be a lower frequency.
Okay.
But it'll last
So
longer.
it'll be yeah, I get
Lower
it now.
intensity, yeah.
So
Mike, I've got a question.
Or Greg.
Or Greg, either one of you. As the quarry gets deeper, is the impact less to the neighbors?
That's one of the.
I remember when they opened the Hoover, now Blue Water Quarry, it you could feel it for miles away. And now, it's been a long time since I ever remember feeling anything, you know. Of course, they may set them off, like Greg said, in smaller doses now.
We've got a motion and a second, and we'll honor that motion and second, but I want to make sure we have as much discussion as needs to be made.
I'm not opposed to exploring and a discussion. Maybe if we can work this into some training and an in-depth, that gives us an in-depth discussion of it, if you can make that work.
We have some facts to confirm the numbers, then
Yeah.
we stay with what we have.
Jim used the word earlier in his dissertation. The more we know about the science, I think the better armed we are to make a better decision. And even those who debated this 6 years ago, and I one of them, may be subject to change my opinion that I made 6 years ago.
I don't know that we want to change it, but I think ours are certainly sufficiently restrictive now. But I don't know that we want to change them.
And we're talking about from the quarry wall, right?
Correct.
On the 1,500.
Right.
I have a piece of property that's 1,000 foot long, and I don't think I would want a quarry even closer than 1,500 myself if I lived in a residential area.
Greg, I got another question. If they start down, I noticed one of these entities that Doug was showing us, it was like 200 feet away from the fence line. But then as they start down, are there state regulations that require that to stair step away from that footage? Or can they go straight down?
I can't answer that for sure, but what I can tell you is that school of thought that created that stair-step effect that you're talking about has gone away per MSHA, the mining division of OSHA. It used to be that they thought that stair-step would eliminate or lessen the chance of a fall, of a shear, a bluff wall shearing. But now they're thinking that stair step is just creating a launching pad. If this one shears, it falls on this one, it causes it to launch even further. So the vertical part of it, I think, they don't do the stairs anymore.
I was planning on talking to Brian Epperson with the TDEC mining section and talking to him about resources and information that he might have as well. So I mean, there's several sources out there that we can look into, but it's just up to y'all, whatever y'all want us to do.
Doug, before we vote, I have one more question. It came up earlier. The portable crushers. What are the regulations on those? You can utilize those, but if you got to hammer the rock outside of normal construction, then you have to have a permit, or what's the deal on those?
It's Greg.
There's others probably better served on that one.
There's a time limit involved. There's a short window that they can.
My understanding on the portable crushers is that material has to be used on site.
Yes.
It can't be transported to another location.
Processed and trucked off.
It can't be processed to another location, or it can't come from another location and taken somewhere else to be processed by a portable crusher. It has to be used on that site.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
If it's not used on that site, it's quarrying.
Right. And it's not adequate enough for, hug mill mix for our roads or anything like that. They use it for, backfill on pipes and what, yeah. But building pads and whatnot. So I mean, there's a limited use that we allow it to.
I had some crushed 12, 15 years ago, which accomplished two things. It gave me gravel to use there, and I got rid of a rock pile that had accumulated over 50 years, So it worked quite well, really.
Josh, let me ask you a question. If this motion passes, could we still go forward with receiving some additional information and having a training session? Could that still happen?
I think you can always choose to entertain information and make changes in the future if you choose to do so. I took the motion to mean you're just not planning to make a change right now based on currently available information.
That was the motion I made. At this time, we do not make changes.
Okay. Everybody clear? We probably ought to do a roll call vote.
But we can still explore, though, right? That's
We
my
can,
understanding.
what Josh, I think, just said is not only can we explore, but we can also bring this motion back up.
Okay.
Or not motion, but we can bring a motion up.
But we're not changing
Right.
today.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not changing today, but we maybe have a training
And I mean,
session.
you couldn't, obviously, and I know that's not what you were thinking. We couldn't have changed it anyway because there has a process it has to go through, but.
Yeah, we're not going forward with changing it today.
Right,
but
right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with that, as long as if y'all can put together some training.
I'm sure we can come up with something. Let's give us a chance. Now, it may not be next month, but, give us a little time. We'll come up with something.
Roll call.
Charlotte P.
Aye. Yes.
Chip Pinion. Craig Lynch.
No.
David Jones.
Yes.
Jim Averwater.
No.
Lee Bogle.
Aye.
Mike Cush.
No.
Mike Vaught.
I'm gonna vote no still.
Pettis Reed.
Yes.
Rhonda Allen.
Yes.
Jeff Phillips.
No.
That's 6 to 5. Yes.
Okay, that motion carries. Now, the chair will entertain a motion to proceed with receiving additional information and even conducting a training session.
So moved.
Pick somebody.
Everyone understand that motion?
Yes.
Discussion on that motion. All those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? So actually what we've done is reaffirmed our commitment that we're satisfied where we are with the current regulation, but what we'd like is more information as we go forward.
Yes, sir.
And that doesn't mean that there's any time frame on that we have to accomplish that anytime soon.
Correct.
So we're wanting some additional information to see if our regulations are still valid and current.
Okay. And then we'll work in that direction.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody happy with that? You understand where we're going now? Okay. I guess that concludes our business. Do you have anything else, Doug, Mike?
Don't have anything, but
I
think
do.
Mike.
Yeah. Well, on a sad note, we have to announce that KDP is leaving for greener or sandier pastures in Florida. She's taking a job in Florida, so we'll miss her. But we still have sinkholes. So, but we are on the search for another stormwater engineer. So. Tell her you appreciate her hard work with the county.
You do.
No, when is that effective? Kind of immediately? Pretty soon?
Yeah, she announced it a couple weeks ago, so we've got another week.
Okay. Pretty good.
Mr. Chair, I have a comment here, and I don't know if anybody else has noticed this. Of course, y'all always notice I have a comment about something. And we're talking about technology today. Between these iPads and that mouse, I'm sure others have the problems with this iPad, particularly on really busy days when we have a lot of sets of plans in here. They're almost non-usable. They're so slow to load and find things on them. It's really
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, I would love to see us look at making some investment in our office technology here.
On
It's
the
really
larger
frustrating.
subdivisions, I don't think it hurt a thing to go back. We don't need it on a rezoning or a one-lot subdivision. But the old paper plans we used to get, you could flip back and forth.
No.
But you look at these, and I mean, we'd be here till lunchtime just waiting on them to load. And there's no way to look at the entire drainage, and that's one reason I ask about drainage a lot, without looking at the whole sheet, the whole subdivision on one sheet.
I'm in agreement with Jim.
Just give me and Craig, maybe Jim, if he wants one, and David might want to look at it every now and then.
We can talk with our OIT folks about what you just mentioned. I mean, some of them are here doing the camera work right now, so I can follow
It's hard
up
to
with
get
them
that
on that.
overall picture without the sheet for me.
Sometimes we do.
Sit down with us and look at the plans as well.
I do good to get here, Mike.
And then
I'll just be honest about it.
But we just need to, sometimes we do go a little fast and trying to look at it on here. We just need to say, wait a minute, let me find it. Or, mine's still stuck.
Well, mine was doing the same thing. When we were going, I mean, I was scrolling. I know it might happen, so I was scrolling ahead a little bit. But you don't know what's going to happen. These bigger sets of plans, and it could be just because I notice it more on the larger sets, site plans that have multiple pages, where sometimes it's an issue. This mouse, I mean, it just needs to get chucked, and we just need to get another one. Yeah, I think we just need to get a new mouse because
Why
this.
don't you all let Katie approve a new requisition for
Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
and then by the time the invoice gets here, she'll be gone.
She'll be gone.
And the issue is not just in this room. We have the same issue in the courthouse.
Yeah.
So if it's a frequency thing or something, it needs to be improved over there as well. So, yeah.
Well, let us look into it. We can do that.
And then, Mr. Chairman, I want to give accolades to the very wise Gail Johnson, who has now implemented our new voting system. I'm delighted by it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. No, I love it. I love it.
Anyone have anything else? I think our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, March the 11th. That'll be a 6 p.m. meeting on the second floor of the courthouse.
And like I
Thank
said,
you for
it's
your-
going to be a full agenda, just so you all are aware. There's going to be a lot on it.
Bring your bottle of water.
Those of you who are county commissioners, I know you've been here a really long time, but if you could give me about 3 minutes in this corner.
What day, Jeff?
Thank you, we're adjourned.